and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Len Jessup. Dr. Jessup is a two-time university president, a two-time business dean, and a long-time business professor. In addition, he is the best-selling author of the book, SelfLess. And he is a startup investor and pioneer. It is my absolute honor to welcome Dr. Len Jessup.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, Dr. Jessup, I'm thrilled that you are here. I want to first begin just by letting our listeners know in this particular podcast, we are not only going to be able to get to know yourself, obviously your background, but then we are going to take a deep dive into the concept of leadership since you have such a profound amount of experience in that particular area. So, Dr. Jessup, if you could please start off with a brief introduction and a background of yourself.
Oh my gosh, Courtney. Okay, let's see. And please call me Len.
Okay.
Make me nervous. People call me doctor. Yeah, I think I should have a stethoscope and be prescribing something. Let's see. I come from a long line of Italian small business men and women, 100% Italian in my family, grandparents on both sides, all immigrating from Italy. And I'm an unlikely, academic. Especially coming from my very humble beginnings with a very blue collar family growing up in San Francisco. And I initially went to college just to play baseball. I went to a little junior college in Northern California and did well in the classroom, probably better in the classroom than I did on the ball field, and got encouragement, thankfully, from faculty who kind of encouraged me to keep going. And I went on to get a PhD, didn't even know what that was, and did it anyway. And then, thought I would just be a professor. I ended up as an undergrad at California State University, Chico, Cal State Chico, probably best known as a party school, but it's actually a pretty good school academically. And faculty there encouraged me. I got to know them. They mentored me. And I thought, boy, okay, I could go do this PhD thing. And then I could come back here to Chico or Sacramento State, Sac State, because I could see what those professors were doing. And that looked like a pretty good thing to do. Like that was a good gig. So I set out to do that, never to kind of become a business school dean or university president. That all came later, completely unexpected, not part of the plan.
That's incredible. And we are certainly going to jump into obviously just your whole career, professional career for that matter. But I would love to take a step back to really focus on the influence that your mother and your father had as you were growing up and how that would obviously impact the amount of success that you would have in your professional career.
Yeah, sure. Now, based on the book and with the speaking that I'm doing, when somebody wants to do an like an expanded day with me, like a half day workshop or even a full day workshop, and I really work through exercises that kind of bring out points in the book.
Yeah.
And I do in the beginning of the sessions, I do a couple of origins exercises to get people thinking about where they came from, the influence that they've had. So I'll do kind of like personal shield and then like family crest. Like if you had a shield in battle and you had all your images on it to kind of note the things in your life that were important to you, that kind of a thing. And then a family crest, similar kind of a thing, things that are important about the family and its history. I do these exercises with executives now. And of all the stuff I do all day long, that seems to be the one that is really impactful and really popular. And I've got these really successful CEOs that have come to tears as they're filling in their family shield or their family crest. It's amazing. And I talk about the examples of my mom and dad as I'm doing that. And you mentioned in your introduction to me the kind of two sides of my life. The servant leadership side comes from my mom for sure. My mom was that. Probably the nicest person I've ever met in my life. Her and my wife, Christy. And it's probably why I was attracted to Christy. My mom was just salt of the earth, the nicest person, would have given anything of herself to help anybody. And that definitely rubbed off on me in who I
Mhm.
am and definitely how I evolved and continue to evolve as a leader. My
Mhm.
dad, came from a family of entrepreneurs, and he was kind of like fireman by day, San Francisco Fire Department, and like a lot of firemen, always had a business on the side. All through my upbringing, there was always some little family small business, and so that I think the entrepreneur side of me came from my dad, and watching him with the various companies that he was involved in. So I definitely a distinct, impact from both of them, and it sort of shaped these two sides of my life: was the leader in academe and the kind of
Yeah.
entrepreneur on the side.
No, absolutely. And I love starting off with that question because it really does lay a foundation as to when we reflect present day, how do you get to where you're at today? And without a doubt, I mean, I could even remember my father, he was a single parent raising me growing up. And it was this idea he would always instill in me just in life, never be afraid to fail. And that has stood with me to honestly to take certain leaps and just leaps of faith technically, because my life, I feel that's the one thing, it was never a straight line. Like I feel like some of my friends, their parents were doctors and they knew literally when they were born they were going to become a doctor. And so
Yeah,
my life was a little bit different, but it always came back to that message that my father had instilled in me, just
that's great.
never be afraid to fail. So I love
That
that
probably
to take
served you well
those.
in athletics, I'm guessing as well.
Yeah, well, and to your point, the sport of gymnastics can be very, very much a humbling sport for that matter. But it was this idea of taking risks. When my coach would tell me, "Okay, Courtney, I think you're ready to do that skill by yourself." Granted, I
Yeah,
was young, so I didn't have the fear, but I would always go for it. And it was, when you look back, when you took those falls, when you literally sometimes fell on your, flat on your face,
yeah,
it was such a good life lesson that you would take on with you to your professional career. You're going to fall down in life. You got to figuratively, of course, pick yourself back up.
yeah.
So I love starting off with that question.
It's
But
great. I love the athletics example. And quickly, I always tell people in baseball, which was my primary sport, um,
yes.
that it's the old saying in baseball. The best hitters hit about 1/3 of the time. You're failing 2/3 of the time at the plate in the main measure of offensive performance, and you just have to get used to that. And it's a long season and a lot of games, and you lose a lot. That's just part of the deal. You have to learn to accept it and to move on.
No, absolutely. And I think the one thing that I love about athletics, it's very transferable to your professional career, just in the fact of, just as you mentioned, I mean, repetition. It takes practice to get to that next level or to get to that next job, so to speak. But it teaches you about persevering in life. And I think that is what I'm most grateful about sport was the perseverance and the resilience to overcome just every challenge or obstacle that would be thrown at you, whether it was an injury, of course, in sport, and then in
Yeah,
your professional career, if something doesn't go as planned, how do you react? And I think that's
yeah,
what's really important.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, as we move forward, just as you mentioned, within the sport of baseball, but your baseball coach had a profound impact on the educational pathway that you would take. So, could you maybe speak upon that just a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of coaches, as I'm sure you did, who were influential in high school as well. Um, but that particular coach was at the junior college, College of the Siskiyous in Northern California. Dennis DeRoss was also an advisor for students. He was my advisor. And I remember one day with him planning when I first got there, and I've got 2 years with him, and I'm planning my course of study, and he's asking me, "What do you think you want to do?" And that community college offered, as they still many of them do, offered 2 year certificates, so designed for students who weren't necessarily going to go on and finish an undergraduate degree. And I told him, I think I'm going to do while I'm here the 2 year business administration certificate, and then I'll probably go back home and I'll work for one business or another business and find something to do. Um, and he just kind of laughed and said, "No, no, no. You're going to go on and you're going to get an undergraduate degree, and I'm going to put together a general ed course of study for you, and then you're going to go on to one of the state universities around Northern California." And I was like, "I'm gonna what? What am I going to do? And what is general education?" I wouldn't have done it, if it hadn't been for him. I credit him for, kind of helping me to look a little bit beyond,
Sure.
what I was looking at the time.
No, absolutely. And I feel even in throughout our life, there's always people that play like that one person at a certain point of your life that could really change the trajectory as to where you head. And I've spoken about this before, but without a doubt, within sport in particular, my college coach, I was in the sport of gymnastics for quite some time, but I ended up leaving the sport for like 3 years roughly, was in my high school years. But had that coach at the collegiate level not provided me the opportunity to walk on, I
Yeah,
always wonder, where would I be today if I wasn't on that team?
yeah,
And like we spoke, I mean, there's so many life lessons of sport, but to really look back and to pay tribute to those people that provide those opportunities. So
yeah.
I do. I love that with coaches. And then, of course, like I said before, with parents. But nevertheless, I want to jump right into the book. So, of course, the
Sure.
title, Selfless. So,
That is it.
yes, yes. There we go. Yep. And I have it too. I have it tons of notes here, but if we could see it,
Oh
woo,
boy,
yay.
thank you. Great.
And I was curious. So I'm going to call you Len just by
Yes,
you letting
yes,
me
thank
know
you.
that.
Okay.
So Len, if you could please just walk us through, like, why did you write this book at this particular time of your life?
Yeah, sure. And it's a project that I started, I'm not kidding you, maybe 30 years ago, because when I got finished with the PhD and I then got into academia, I just started capturing little notes of things that would happen that I thought were interesting.
Sure.
Not really knowing why I was doing that. It wasn't really journaling. I wasn't really doing it, sort of formally every day, but I like to write. Writing came easy to me. um, Most of my writing was on, academic writing and research papers and that kind of a thing. But I liked also just writing for fun. So I would just
Mhm.
capture these little vignettes and I would store them up in different places. And then at some point, probably 5, 10 years ago, a good friend and mentor of mine who's helped me a lot on my leadership journey,
Mhm.
Bill Maynard, um, he started bugging me about writing a book about my experiences, a leadership book. And I
Sure.
just kept putting it off. I kept thinking, I do have some good little anecdotes I know that I can use, but I'm too busy doing stuff to write about doing stuff. You know what I mean? It just was kind of my head down, super busy. And then finally, would have been a couple of summers ago, kind of coming out of COVID. That summer, I was down at Claremont Graduate University, a member of the
Mhm.
Claremont colleges in Southern California, and I'm there and I'm president. And that summer, I had time on my hands, kind of at night and on the weekends. And so, kind of the back half of the summer, I finally decided to gather up all the collection of those notes and then put it together. And I started, writing the book kind of proper. So that would have been summer of, I don't know, 23. I can't remember, but it was a couple summers ago. So I actually wrote the draft, or the early draft of this book,
Mhm.
and then I didn't have the courage to do anything with it. So I
Oh,
sat on it for a full year, from whatever it was, summer of 22 to summer of 23. I think I ended up showing it to my family, kind of my wife and my kids and my siblings. Um, and as you might expect, my wife, very encouraging. My kids never read it. They're just like, I don't think they've still, the book is done. I don't think they're 22 and 27. I'm not sure that they've actually read it yet. My
oh.
siblings, highly critical of it. So, kind of what you expect. So I sat on it for a year. Then that summer of 23, this is a case of the universe working out for me in serendipity. Forbes Publishing reached out. They were looking for authors. They found me, they reached out. Next thing I know, so that was summertime. By about that August, I'm under contract with them. And then from August to April, whatever that is, 8 or 9 months, then the book came out April of 2024, this past April. So that's kind of the journey of the book. Isn't it interesting? And it's like a 30-year working process that finally, kind of then comes to fruition, after all that time.
No, that has to be such an exciting moment though. Like once you finish the book, like what were the emotions about writing the book and then having it published and sitting in your hands for the first time?
Yeah, I've done a lot of writing and publishing and research articles and textbooks and monographs. So I've had that feeling many times.
Right.
This was different though because this was more of a work from the heart.
Yeah.
A bit of my own storytelling. So to your point, it was special. I mean, to have that moment when the boxes arrived at
Mhm.
home in Claremont, and Christy was with me, and I'm cutting open the boxes and getting out the books, and it was special. More than producing a textbook, this was really felt like it was a work of emotion and kind of
Mhm.
the telling a personal story. Yeah, so
No,
it was a special moment.
absolutely. And the reason I asked that question is, like you said, I mean, it obviously was a special moment, but this particular book, I think what I admire is the amount of vulnerability that you share with your readers. And at the beginning of the book, you speak about a moment in time that really made you reflect on this idea, the concept of like selfless
Oh,
leadership.
yeah.
So, could you maybe speak to that as to literally laying the foundation of the book?
Yeah. And I had I had drafted much of the book. I mean, that was always a poignant moment for me,
Yeah.
but it was sort of toward the end of the production of the book, and I had to end up going back and then change the whole front end of the book after this another moment that happened to me.
Yeah.
So at Claremont, in my final year as president, I began the year with a leadership retreat, as I often did. At the beginning of every year, kind of from dean forward. I'd begin the year with the immediate leadership team, everybody who reported to me, and then kind of would go beyond that. So I typically like to get a group of about 20 or 30 people from around the organization from diverse backgrounds. And we would do like a day long retreat to kind of kick off the year and what
Yeah.
we would work on together. So a little bit of strategic planning and team building all combined.
Mhm.
I often seek help in putting together the retreats. So
Mhm.
for that particular one, I asked for help from Jennifer Villalobos, who was working on her PhD at the time in organizational behavior or development. Um, and so we're kind of talking about the agenda, and she suggests an idea for kind of the icebreaker. And that's what we ended up using. And it was, think about a moment that you are at your best, living your best self, and then talk about what the moment was and then why it represents that to you and why it was a special moment. So she tees it up and she's got the whole group going and they're all starting. And we're up at the front of the room talking quietly with each other while they're all kind of making their notes and figuring out what their moment is. And she tells me, okay, you're going to need to come up with a moment too, because she said, you and I will each start and describe our moment. So I
Mhm.
think for a minute, and of course I go right back to the moment, the night at the mountain house
Yeah.
where I lived for 10 or 11 years in Moscow, Idaho, in northern Idaho.
Wow.
And then she goes, okay, let's quietly, privately, we'll share our moments with each other first before we talk to the group. So I'm going through my moment and I'm crying as
Oh.
I'm telling Jennifer. And I finally stopped and I said, Jennifer, I don't think I can do this with the group. I don't think I'll be able to get through it. And she encouraged me to do it. I did. And of course, I broke down crying. But the good news was I think it then sort of opened up the rest of the room for everybody else to then be open. And there were tears of like every other person. It was a really emotional, personal story of different kinds, good, bad, and everything in between. And it ended up being, I mean, more than an icebreaker. I mean, it really brought our group, our expanded leadership team together quite tightly for the rest of that year, and working on some difficult stuff that we had to work on together. And I think that moment helped us create the bond that we needed to get through the stuff we were going to do that year. And I'll just say briefly. So it was
Yeah.
back what you talked about, being raised by single parent.
Yeah.
So this was at a moment when I was at Washington State University, and I had just gone through a very difficult divorce.
Mm.
And so I had two kids at the time who were very young, and their mom and I had decided on a parenting plan where we would share the kids for half the time, each, and they'd go back and forth to each house. I had just transitioned from being the business school dean to being the vice president for university development fundraising. And there was a night where at the mountain house, because it was a great house that looked out over the valley, and you could see, I lived over on the Idaho side of the border, and you could see the Kibbe Dome and the University of Idaho down below. It was a great setting and a great place to raise them. And I got them tucked away in their beds. And then I came out back into the living room, and it's at night, and I'm seeing all the lights down in town from Idaho. And I'm feeling so sad and sorry for myself. And I pour myself a really good Washington Cabernet. And I'm sipping my wine and I'm crying. I'm literally crying into my Cabernet. And on everything I was feeling, it was a whole range of emotions. I had everything associated with the divorce, the pain and the guilt and the frustration and everything around that, all negative, and just feeling sorry for myself. And then in the moment, feeling, I'll go forward. In the go forward for me was fear. How am I going to raise these kids for half the week by myself? How am I possibly going to do that? Especially moving into the VP role, fundraising, and I'm going to be expected to travel. And I had no idea how I was going to make all that work. And then in the moment, and it was probably the strongest of all the feelings, was even though I had my kids there with me, feeling like a loneliness that I had never felt in my life, like at the level of despair. I was so lonely, and wondering, also how am I, as the person, the man, Len, how am I going to get through this? I just felt, again, so alone. More I had my kids, but it was more at an adult level, and I was up there on the mountain and I'm by myself, literally. It was a tough night, but to your point, and it sort of made me go back and rethink kind of how I framed the book and everything. And I ended up rewriting the front of the book around this story, because it was a night where I had to dig deep, because I had been living pretty selfishly. I wasn't a bad person, but everything in my life with my family and my wife and everything it all revolved around me, my job, my career. And it was, in that sense, it was a pretty selfish kind of a way to live. And so I got forced to stop being selfish and to start being more selfless, and thinking about other people and around my kids. And it was a pivotal moment for me. It really was a kind of a huge shift in my mindset going forward.
Wow. So I want to pick this apart,
Yeah,
because when you were talking about when you were in that group at the school, just pulling
yeah,
everybody together, and you were sharing this story with tears, there is a certain level, human element to it, that people, I think, especially today, I think people really crave a certain level of authenticity. That when you look, this is what I always talk about, when you look at somebody's, for example, like a professional career on, resume or CV, so forth,
yeah,
it looks so smoothly. You transition from one, role to the next, XYZ. But truly, behind the scenes, we all experience challenges, those pivotal moments where we're literally forced to kind of look within ourselves and maybe redirect our path. I know
yeah,
that has certainly happened to me before. And you had mentioned it too at the beginning of our conversation, but I know recently, after I got out of my PhD program, it's literally, I guess, almost a year now here,
yeah,
December 23. But I would go on these walks because I did not know 100% what my path was going to look like. I
yeah,
knew I was going to be an adjunct professor, but what else I was going to do on the side. And I think it's in those moments, those quiet moments, that we are really able to kind of understand where that path is going to go. What is the next way? And I think, to your point, that pivotal moment, which obviously would then actually lead you to an immense amount of success within your professional career and how you would interact with others. So I want to talk about your academic career and obviously
yeah,
all the roles, but you really hone in on, in the book, what's called it's obviously an acronym here, but a gas routine, and the
right.
importance. Yes, can you maybe just elaborate on that? I thought that was really
Sure.
interesting.
That was, boy, I mean, kind of came out of self-preservation. I
Sure.
had I had read and then heard, kind of online, Tony Robbins talking about something similar that he would do in the mornings to
Mhm.
kind of set his intentions for the day and motivate him. And so I kind of I took a little bit of that, and some that I learned from my wife. Trained with Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul, and the
Mhm.
Success Principles, and is one of his master trainers. And I heard Jack talk about this to a certain extent also. So it's sort of an amalgam of stuff that I'd heard.
Sure.
And as I got into sort of successively more sort of larger and more difficult roles and taking on more difficult things, um, I, I faced a lot of adversity and a lot of very difficult and challenging times and things that we were trying to accomplish as a team. And I and I needed something like this. So this is what I devised, this routine, GAS. And I still do it to this day, but not every morning. Usually it's when I'm
Mhm.
going through something difficult that I'll
Mhm.
get up early in the morning and I'll start with this in the morning. And the acronym is GAS, grateful, asking, and then set your intentions.
Yeah.
So the first part of the routine, I would just kind of take a few minutes to think about the things that I was grateful for. And it might be around my wife or my family, my
Sure.
kids. I've got a good job. I'm employed. I'm making a difference. Just keep going until I exhaust the set, just to try to get out of the negative thinking that when you're involved in difficult stuff, you wake up in the morning sometimes where you wake up and then all those thoughts come rushing back in. You go, oh my God, I want to go back to sleep.
So
How do I, you know, so this was
so
a way to get out of that and start to putting myself back into a grateful mindset. And then I would kind of borrowing from The Secret, I would ask in the universe for help. And I would, very specific things that I was dealing with that I needed help with. I would ask for health and guidance. I would imagine that I was getting that help and that I was able to solve the problems or move through the impasses, imagining the successful state of that. Again, all about changing the mindset. And then I would end with set your intention. The S was for setting the intention for the day. And I would set my intention for that day and I would think about the things that I was going to do. Even though I had difficult things, difficult meetings, difficult conversations, I
sure.
would think about how I wanted them to go, and what I wanted the outcomes to be, and that how it would feel when I had good outcomes through the day. And it would help, in the space of just 5 or 10 minutes. I
Sure.
changed my mindset for the day, and it made a huge difference in getting through really difficult times.
No, thanks for sharing that. And I certainly have a routine. I don't necessarily have like an acronym to it, but I will say like
Yeah,
when I wake up, I love writing in my journal. I love literally having a cup of coffee in the morning, waking me
yeah,
up. Gratitude, I think, is such a powerful thing to really stay in that moment. Like just like you said, when your mind's going to like, what are you doing next? How are you even going to accomplish it? Type mentality, but to really hone you back in and kind of center you into
yeah,
life. That you have a roof over your head, that you have a job, that all the good things in life, family, the support system. But I think having a morning routine, especially like for myself, like in the morning when it's quiet, I could really think through my thoughts very clearly
yeah,
if I am maybe needing some direction or guidance in career or whatnot. That you could kind of hear like, okay, this is where I'm at right now. And I could see myself now going here. Like if it was loud, if I have my earphones in, I'm running out, so forth.
yeah.
You can't concentrate, I think, with all the noise and distractions that just present day brings to us. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And
It really helped me through some difficult times.
yeah. And now, I really would love to jump right into leadership. Obviously, you have an
Yeah,
expansive amount of leadership experience. So, I would love to start with you obviously were a two-time president both at UNLV and Claremont Graduate University. So, what were maybe some lessons, going from a private school and a public school? What were some differences and maybe just some positive lessons you learned from each?
yeah. Sure. I can start with that difference, the
Sure.
contrast, because I spent my whole life, at public schools and public universities, going to and working at. And Claremont, what a great way to cap off my career because I'd never gone to or worked at a private institution. And there was a big difference between UNLV, the big urban, diverse public, really kind of an all access school, although we worked on having it become a Carnegie R1 research institution.
Sure.
Um, and then going to the little elite private and the Claremont colleges, I often joke that we were like the Ivy League schools, but with better weather. And that's kind of what they are. and they're hard to get into, and they're great little schools. That contrast was so distinct that, in fact, that summer I made that move in 2018. The Chronicle of Higher Ed did I'd never seen it before, and I've never seen it since. And they had a ranking of people who made the sort of most high contrast moves from one institution to the next. And they had criteria,
Sure.
like public to private got me a lot of points, and the size of the institution, 30,000 to 2,000, that earned me a lot of points. I was number one in their ranking, making the most contrasting move from one institution to the other institution. Yeah, pretty funny. And
Wow.
so they were different. I mean, in a nutshell, it was like managing, um, to use a military analogy, it was like managing a battle group, right, being the commander of a fleet and a battle group, to kind of being on like a little PT boat, super Claremont, super nimble, entrepreneurial. We could change on a dime. Our pricing was dynamic pricing because we used discounting,
Mhm.
and so we would offer different tuition points for different students based on their needs, and much more bureaucratic and very difficult to change things
Mhm.
at the large state
Right.
institution with many layers of bureaucracy and boards and approvals and things. And
Mhm.
so I actually found that I fit really well at the small private because it sort of fit my mentality more as the entrepreneur, and being able to just try things and experiment on the fly. I was a really good fit there, and so I enjoyed getting that chance in a small private.
That's incredible. And you just mentioned something I wanted to ask you about. Like, where
Yeah.
did your entrepreneurial spirit and mindset really stem from?
I think, like I mentioned, like most of it from my dad, because even
Yeah.
though he was a fireman, San Francisco Fire Department, city and county employee with good benefits, and
Sure.
retirement, health benefits, and all that. And he had encouraged me to go that way, go civil service job. He actually initially wasn't very encouraging of college. He thought that I should go for a good, safe civil service job. Isn't that interesting? That's where my dad was pushing me early on. But but he also always had some interesting business that it was either his or that he was involved in all along the way of my growing up. And I got to see that, and I really liked it, and it made an impression on me. And I mean, I think it honestly comes from there. And then when I got into when I got my PhD, it was in management, and then I
Mhm.
minored in information systems. I had just enough technical that the jobs when I came out,
Mhm.
1989, most of the faculty jobs, it was hot in anything technology related.
Yeah.
So most of my teaching career, I ended up leaning on my minor area, my supporting area, the information systems, and so I encountered a lot of students studying in majoring in IS and sort of tech related courses and majors who are very entrepreneurial by nature, and I really that resonated with me. And then later on at Washington State University, I got the opportunity. Somebody needed to run the entrepreneurship program, and I was all over it. I was like, I will absolutely do that. And then so that was a 4 year period where I got to run that program, and I had a blast. That of all the stuff I've done, that was probably the most fun that I've had, and that assignment in that 4 years was just a blast. And then a bunch of things kind of spawned from that kind of helped me to be doing what I'm doing now today and helping UNLV with its inaugural venture capital fund. So, I think it was watching my dad do little mom and
Mhm.
pop this and mom and pop that to, now helping with a venture capital fund. I mean, I think it all started back there.
That's incredible. And I have to agree with you. My father actually, he dabbled in entrepreneurship too as well. And that
Yeah.
kind of gave me that like entrepreneurial bug, so to speak. And present day, I teach an entrepreneurship in sport class. And there is something about entrepreneurship. Like I think why I'm drawn to it is it's that sense of uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what tomorrow could truly bring,
Yeah.
and the being able to adapt to change. I mean, obviously today more so than ever, you
Yeah.
have to be able to adapt to change. But The one thing I wanted to, you had actually mentioned it too, but at this high level of obviously being a university president, when you were at UNLV, you took on some massive projects. One, like you said, being getting the university to make an R1 status.
Yeah.
And then also the medical school, getting that accredited. Can you maybe speak to these very large projects that you would take on and how you went about doing that?
Yeah, and it all started from the goal. I mean, the vision was that UNLV needed to kind of grow up and become this modern Carnegie R1 research institution,
Mhm.
and the purpose of that. I mean, it wasn't the end; it was a means to an end. That we needed to have that happen because it needed to play a role in the evolution of Las Vegas and of the state of Nevada. Nevada is a relatively small state of about 3 million people, most of whom live in Las Vegas. The economy of the state of Nevada is driven by businesses along a 2 mile stretch on the strip. I mean, that generates the bulk of the revenue for the state. And everybody knew that we knew that as the state evolved, we needed to work on the kind of the growth and evolution of Las Vegas and the diversification of the Las Vegas economy so that
Mhm.
it would evolve beyond gaming and hospitality so that it was more recession resistant and stronger and more sustainable and resilient, and that it needed a really good strong research university in Las Vegas in order
Yeah.
for that to happen. So that was the sort of vision that I really bought into, and it made me a perfect fit coming as a tech and
Oh,
entrepreneurship professor and a business school
mhm.
dean to then kind of then be the person that could help to make that happen at UNLV. So that's why we wanted UNLV to evolve into being a Carnegie R1 institution. So then you sit down and you think, okay, how does this school do that? So we benchmarked three institutions that had done that: Arizona State University, University of Houston, and UCF, University of Central Florida,
Oh,
had all kind of done that ahead of us. So we visited them, we benchmarked them. So it's not like I had to figure this out by myself. I mean, you go look at places that have done that, and we learn from them, and then that helped us establish a strategic plan here that involved things like the launching of the medical school,
mhm.
getting it funded, getting it its initial accreditation, laying the pathwork for all the buildings and the complex and raising all that money that it would eventually move into. And then on the athletic side, similarly, we had an aspiration for UNLV to grow beyond the Mountain West Conference that we knew at one point that this just happened about a year ago. We knew that there'd be the shifting around the Pac-12 and the Big 12 when their television contracts came up in kind of 2022, 2023. So
Right.
we knew we needed to do things to position ourselves to make that move also into a Power Five conference and out of the Group of Five. So again, I was talking with presidents and athletic directors and commissioners in those two conferences about what they would need for us to do in order to them to be accepting of us into their conferences. And it was very specific. They said, you got to get better at football. You need to build a football practice facility, which we did, raised 30 or 40 million to do that. You need to get a better stadium. So that really put a sense of urgency on us being a part of the attracting the NFL. We were a part of the whole um, deal and construction of Allegiant Stadium with UNLV as a partner. That all happened, and then after I left, they were able to recruit Coach Odom. And now it's a 10-2 season, and they're in the Mountain West Championship tomorrow night against Boise State. So that was all by design, all according to a plan, learning from others, who had gotten there before us.
Gosh, that's incredible. I would love to talk about too. That seemed like it was so easy, and of course it
Yeah,
wasn't. But
into all of that. And
it's
then
just
each of those things are super difficult to do. I mean,
I was, I was going to say, just listening to you, it seemed like it just went one, two, three. But
yeah,
no, but of course, we know that there's challenges and adversity that arises just with creating things. And I could remember, I believe it was at Arizona, but you created an online MBA program. Can you speak to how you got people on board to then really push that forward?
yeah. when I went back as dean, so I was there for my PhD, and then 20 plus years later, I go back to be the dean there. And I did my 100-day listening tour like a good leader does, listening to all the stakeholders internally and externally. And it was obvious that even though the business school there, the Eller College of Management after Carl
Mhm.
Eller, um, even though they had done an online master's in information systems that was successful, the faculty
Mhm.
by and large were really reluctant to go beyond that and to get into online. And they were really kind of late to the game at that point, especially around the MBA platform.
Yeah.
The MBA enrollments there had been declining, like they were for a lot of on-ground MBA programs back
Mhm.
then. They're rebounding a little bit in certain parts of the country, but there's been, on-ground MBA, a declining market. And early on, schools were then shifting over into the online MBA market. I had some experience doing that at prior institutions. We knew we needed to do it there. That kind of came out of the listening tour. But
Sure.
I knew that I had I was going to get a lot of pushback from the broader business school faculty.
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, as we started to have the conversations about the online MBA, we were getting a lot of pushback, and it was kind of passive aggressive. And we were getting like these weird kind of 30,000 foot level,
Yeah.
really kind of more general arguments that didn't seem to make sense and didn't seem to fit. Like
Yeah.
things like, oh, we're going to be training, leaders in the MBA program, and you can't do that online. I mean, you can't help to create or hone a leader that
Yeah.
way. Or, you can't that like a lot of intellectual academic speak. That pedagogy doesn't meet, that approach doesn't meet pedagogical goals. And like, what are you talking about? People around the country in top ranked MBA programs are already doing this, and they're producing leaders very well, thank you, and placing them and getting ranked. And so those arguments just don't hold water. So my associate dean, this is, I think, I use this as an example in the book where a selfless lens on leadership, I think, actually helps to manage resistance to change, because we were kind of at loggerheads with these faculty, and there was a lot of ego involved, and we weren't getting anywhere. And we had a feeling we weren't getting to the real reasons why faculty were really bothered by this. So I give the credit to Jeff Schatzberg, the associate dean, high emotional intelligence, and he said we need to get out of the building, off campus. Let's go talk with a group of these faculty in a more personal setting. And so it was a series of meetings and lunches and maybe a couple of beers with some people kind of down, at one of the local bars. And we finally got to the heart of the matter when we stripped everything away. And I had a very senior group of faculty, mostly men, who
Mhm.
were, you know, they didn't want to go through the change of having to take their course that they've been used to doing very well, thank you, in the on-ground environment, and port it over into an online course in a learning management system. What the heck is that? And now I've got to work with an instructional designer, and I don't want anybody tinkering with my course. And the point, and this is the point of selfless leadership. We
Yeah.
realized, Jeff and I, talking to these guys, that they were right. So not only
Mhm.
did we take the time to listen and actually listen and empathize with them, but we agreed with them. We found ourselves agreeing with them. So total selflessness, take yourself out of it. And we agreed, and we said, you guys are right. Yeah, you shouldn't have to do that at this point. That's a heavy lift for you, and you're really going to only teach for a few more years. You're right. It doesn't make sense. So then we reached a detente with them. How about this? You keep teaching the stuff you teach in the on-ground MBA program, because we're not going to pull the plug on it. You teach it very well. You keep doing that. Just agree that we're going to let these other champions over here build. They're going to design, build, and teach the online MBA, and we're all going to benefit from the revenue that generates, because we need it, and we all agreed on that. But we just need you not to sabotage the efforts of this younger group of faculty. Just please let them do it and don't get in the way. And we reached a detente, and then we built the online MBA. And thank God, now that platform in Arizona's got hundreds of students and is quite successful and generating a lot of revenue that the school needs. And it's like hundreds of students versus cohorts of 30 students or 50 students in the on-ground MBA. A world of difference in the size. And I mean, thank God we got through the impasse, because they needed it. I mean, the business school needed it going forward. but we had to kind of get out of ourselves and get kind of check our ego at the door, in order to get there and really understand these guys and what their problems were.
No, thank you for like walking us through that because, like I said, it just seems like sometimes when you take on like a leadership position, there inevitably is going to be pushback from different,
Yeah,
viewpoints or perspectives, and how you are really able to come together. And what I kind of heard from what you were saying too, it was a sense of obviously listening, but that sense of compromise too,
yeah,
of being able to listen to those people who may not have wanted it, but that you're going to stay over here, just like you said, like just don't
yeah,
sabotage it. And what's interesting, just speaking like very generally, is online programs. I'm a person, I know we're obviously online here, but
yeah,
I'm a person that's so much better in person, should I say. But have I done online classes? Absolutely.
yeah,
But it's, I think a lot of those MBA programs too throughout the years, it's pretty heavy now just to obviously balance for those who are at work during the day. And then
yeah.
obviously, do finish your MBA too, while you're at it. So no, thanks for sharing that. And just moving forward, speaking from, you've obviously, I mean, like you said, I mean, you went from president, you've gone to dean positions to being a business professor, but could you maybe speak to one particular challenge that stood out, but yet you were able to overcome it? And if you could just explain that particular process.
Boy,
I know.
there were many. So I'm just trying to think of what would be a
Yeah.
good example to use. You know, lots of challenges and difficult things to do. I mean, at UNLV, so think about what we talked about, that strategic plan. Needed to get the university from point A to point B, and that had a lot of components to it from our benchmarks that we knew we needed to do, the stadium being one of them. Um, Between the medical school and the stadium, I don't know which was more difficult. They were both incredibly difficult, and both had stakeholders who didn't want those projects to happen and worked very actively against them in both cases. And that's that way. Anytime you're going to do something big where you're really moving the needle and doing something significant, there is always going to be people that adversely affects, and they're going to be against it. And you hope that their their resistance will be out in the open so you know it and you can understand it and deal with it. But it's often passive aggressive, and it's difficult to even know kind of where you're getting hit from. Um, so I'll use the medical school as an example where there were people that didn't want the medical school to happen. And I don't want to pick on anybody, but you'd think, with Las Vegas as the largest city at the time in the United States without its own kind of local standalone medical school, you'd think it'd be natural and everybody would want that. And it was affecting a lot of things with access to healthcare. I think it'd be a no-brainer. But there were forces in Las Vegas, and more acutely forces in other parts of the state that didn't want the medical school. They didn't want there to be a standalone medical school in Las Vegas, and so that made it very difficult to maneuver to try to figure out where that resistance was. To try to, like with my example with the professors, to try to understand why that resistance was there. How could we find some sort of compromise or common ground, or just a workaround to be able to neutralize that pocket of resistance, and to sort of kind of build countervailing forces, that could
Mhm.
overrule that force. If I couldn't change it, then I had to deal with it somehow, some way. So that professionally, those are two examples of incredibly difficult projects I was involved in. And I think the medical school is probably more difficult, believe it or not, than the stadium. Like the
Really?
stadium we had to overcome initially resistance to the 30, there are 32 football teams, so 32 owners. The one owner, Mark Davis, Raiders, he was for it. He wanted to move to Las Vegas, but we had a lot of resistance among the other 31 owners who were really worried about gambling and the effect it might have on the team being in sports betting and then being in Las Vegas. So we had a whole group, because the hospitality school's top in the world. It's usually top one or two with Cornell. And we had a gaming innovation group led by Bo Bernard, who's now the vice president for economic development for the university. But he was running the Gaming Innovation Center. And we commissioned Bo to do a study of the impact that it might have with an NFL team there from the point of view of gaming. So he did the study, and then we sent it to the owners. He actually went and presented to an owners group and convinced them that, in fact, Las Vegas would be the easiest, the best place to do it because it's so heavily regulated. And that they, in fact, at the time, were playing games in London while people were betting on the games on their phones in the stadium. They were already doing it. So anyway, it took a lot of work, but we got the owners convinced that it would be okay for them to be here. That was an example of one of the sort of hurdles that we had to get over on the stadium project. Many more difficult things, but I still think the medical school is tougher. It's harder to get that done.
That's incredible. And the reason I ask that is just in like obviously a more broader sense, not that many have been able to experience quite that level
Yeah,
of experience at the top, but just how building relationships and emotional intelligence too amongst people, getting
yeah,
to know different types of personalities, how you're able to really overcome those challenges when they are presented, because
yeah,
inevitably, as we know, they will be presented. So thank you for just elaborating on that.
yeah.
But also, you are extremely humble for obviously all the success that you have garnered. And at the end of your book, you speak about this idea of you really don't see yourself as a leader per se, but more so a student of leadership. So maybe could you expand upon that?
Yeah, it's you've maybe heard the saying, sort of, people will say, I try to surround myself with people smarter than me.
Yeah.
That has definitely been my approach all the way through, and which is a little odd for academe because I've got a lot of very good close friends, hundreds of them all throughout the country in business schools and other parts of universities. However, you very typically do get people in academe who are very smart and like to think of themselves as the smartest person in the room, and it's very competitive. And when they then kind of move up into leadership roles, that approach doesn't work at all. It doesn't work, right? Because you get a bunch of sycophants that don't want to say anything to you. Um, so my approach has always been surround myself by people smarter than me, make sure we're all working toward the same common goal. Hopefully, it's a shared, co-created vision. And then I get them the resources that they need to get their part of the plan done, and I try to stay out of their way largely and listen to them, as they're uncovering problems, and then we're working together to overcome them. And so that sort of then, lends itself into the quote that you picked up on at the end of the book, that I sort of think of this self in a Zen way. It's like a Zen-like journey leadership. I think that you never actually arrive, that it's not about the destination. You don't arrive there all of a sudden, and I'm a leader now. And it's that I'm a work in progress. I'm learning. I continue to learn. I think of myself that way now. I continue to learn as a student of leadership. I use the quote attributed to Michelangelo. So in the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel, he's 87 years old, and historians believe that it was noted as saying, as 87-year-old taking on this project, on caro. God, now I'm going to forget the Italian, but it was in a paro on caro. I can't remember the quote exactly in Italian, but he's saying, and yet, I mean, kind of, here I am, and I'm doing all this, and the little bit of Italian is, and yet I'm still learning.
Yeah.
I thought really important lesson there, from talk about somebody at the top of their game. Thinking, no, I've still got a lot to learn here, and I'm surrounded by other really great artists who are helping me. Anyway, so that's kind of how I got to that way of thinking about my life and about leadership. Yeah, I don't think of myself as having gotten there yet. I'm still figuring it out.
No, that's incredible. And I really like that perspective though, just that you're a work in progress, that you could always be learning. I feel like even in academia, once you reach that terminal degree, that idea, I don't know, I reflect back, and when I finished, it was when you move forward, you may be going in different directions that you've never been before. And when you were talking about surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you, who have more wisdom, I think that is such an amazing piece of advice, because you could learn so much, and you could also avoid certain mistakes too that you may, run into, or had you not, maybe got a mentor. And I just wanted to ask you that during your time in your career, did you have many mentors, or was there maybe one specific time when you reflected and you're like, this is when I really need a mentor?
I think when you have that mindset that you don't know everything,
Yeah.
then you are open to learning from others, and you have mentors.
Yeah.
And so I've had them all the way through everything, and I still do.
Yeah.
People that I consider to be very successful, I have a lot of respect for them, and that I seek their help and guidance, their advice, and I still do to this day. And I've had many all the way through. I can think of a good example when I was at University of Arizona. I'm recruited back to be the dean. I got to be close with one of the board members from the Board of Regents, very successful business executive, and he recommended that I go meet the president at Arizona State University, who was probably about less than halfway through his tenure there, Michael Crow. So, very successful, long-serving president, and Arizona now for about 10 years in a row rated as the most innovative university in the country. So, my board chair sort of brokered this introduction, and I drive up, from Tucson to Phoenix, and I meet with Michael, and he's very gracious with his time with me. And he and I, during that time when I was dean at Arizona, Tucson, about once a month,
Mhm.
maybe once a quarter, I would go up to Tempe, and Michael would give me an hour. And no matter what the temperature was, we would spend an hour walking his campus, and he talked nonstop. Every once in a while, I got to ask a question. He would just talk nonstop. And this is why we did that, the biosciences collaborative, and this is how that happened. And then we built the Honors College with the Barrett family from Intel. And he's walking me through how he was doing all this stuff, was very helpful to me. And so he remains to this day to be a friend and colleague and a mentor. And he's helped me a lot along the way with different jobs and different difficult things that I've worked with. Um, and I've had many like him along the way that have helped me out a lot. You're never too old to have a mentor.
No, thank you for that insight too, because I think having a mentor is so incredibly important, especially of course if you're entering into a new career path or just a brand new industry, perhaps too. So, Dr. Jessup, I just want to say thank you, obviously, for being on this podcast. But on this podcast, we at least like to end on a positive note, or perhaps if you have a positive phrase that you would like to share with the community.
Absolutely, Courtney, and thanks again for doing this. It's been a fun hour. It's gone by really quickly,
No.
and I appreciate you in having me be a part of this. So I'm going to pull something from the book toward the end that I love the quote. John F. Kennedy. It's the famous speech at Rice University, September of 1962, just shortly after I was born, and it's the moon speech. And the quote, most people like the quote because that's when he said, we're going to get a man to the moon by the end of the decade, and return him safely to Earth. It's that moonshot, kind of part of it. But that's not the part of the quote I like. I liked when he said, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do these other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." I like it because it's anything you want to do that's worthwhile is going to be hard by definition. And you're going to have adversity. There are going to be challenges. There are going to be naysayers. And the positivity part of that is that that's a choice, right? That's a mindset and it's a choice. And you can choose to remain positive as you work through those difficulties. And it reminds me of another quote, Randy Pausch, the last lecture, that those barriers, they're not put there to keep you out. It's to remind you how important the thing on the other side is that you're trying to get to. So keep your chin up, keep a smile on your face, and just keep grinding.
No, thank you so much for that, Len. And once again, thank you for being on the podcast. A big congratulations, obviously, to all the success that you have garnered over the years. And I wish you the best as you move forward. So thank you once again.
Courtney, thank you too, and good luck on your journey as well. And thanks again for having me.